Is liberty dying where you live? Escape to Keene at freekeene.com.
Good morning. Thank you for coming today. Representative McGuire and I are holding this press conference to answer any questions that the public might have about the bill to decriminalize prostitution in New Hampshire. We put forward this bill in response to Amnesty International's August 2015 recommendation that governments across the world decriminalize prostitution. Amnesty International studied the issue for 2 years prior to their recommendation. They are joining the World Health Organization, the International Labor Organization, the Global Alliance Against Trafficking in Women, the Global Network of Sex Work Projects, the Global Commission on HIV and the Law, Human Rights Watch, the Open Society Foundations, and Anti-Slavery International. We expect passage of this bill to result in reduced violence against women, reduced spread of sexually transmitted infections, and an increase in a cooperative relationship between sex workers and police, including access to the justice system for people who haven't had access to our institutions for a long time. I'm joined today by Bella Robinson from Coyote, Rhode Island, and Rachel West from the U.S. Prostitutes Collective. They're organizations that advocate for sex workers' rights, and I'm happy that they will be helping me with testimony today in front of the committee. I can now take any questions. This is my first press conference.
Are either of them here to speak at this press conference?
If Rachel, Bella, and Phoebe, I believe, are all happy to take questions.
Hi everyone, my name is Bella Robinson. I'm the Executive Director of the Rhode Island chapter of Coyote. I've been a sex worker for over 30 years. I still currently make my living as a sex worker, and I have done sex work in the state of New Hampshire. One of the reasons that I support the bill to decriminalize prostitution is it is the only model that has been proven to reduce violence towards sex workers and reduce human trafficking. In New Zealand, they just about rid the industry of exploitation. They've not had a trafficking case since 2009. The women report better relationships with the police and able to report violence. I would like to answer any questions or concerns that anyone has because I'm an expert on the topic. I present regularly at Rutgers UNH, Southern Connecticut University. I'm doing a fabulous research project with Brown University. I've already interviewed 43 New England sex workers. And from what we're seeing in the data from both sides of the country, the women say they don't feel that they can go to the police and report violence. And this is an issue. When you're criminalized, it gives people a lot of power, and that's what causes people to be able to exploit and abuse sex workers. Anyone have any questions? Yes?
What places, I might not be right, but in Las Vegas, is prostitution legal? And are there other places? And how does that work there as far as women?
It's actually, that's a great question. It's actually in Nevada. A friend of mine from UNLV, Christina Pereira, is a grad student. She's actually working at the brothels as a prostitute legally. Now, I don't really like their model. I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you the difference between legalization and decriminalization. In Nevada, a woman has to get a sheriff's card. You go down and get fingerprinted. Then you have to get a work permit. Then you have to pay for your weekly testing. Then you have to pay the brothel $20 a day rent. You have to live at the brothel for the couple weeks that you're working. And then you have to give half your money to the brothel and then pay taxes. Now I want to explain how Rhode Island worked. From 1979 until 2009, indoor prostitution in Rhode Island was decriminalized. Before then, it was a felony. The spas were set up where the client would pay a $50, $60 door fee. They went in the back, they negotiated with the worker. They couldn't come up with a deal. They went back up front, they gave their money back, they left. The women got to keep all their money. The women got to pick what shifts they worked, and the women did not have to live in the brothels. Women were free to work from home, from hotels, for escort agencies, for spas. Another thing I want to talk about is third-party support. It is essential for sex workers' safety that these women are allowed to work together. We have all these trafficking laws that basically 2 girls, a cell phone, and a condom, and it's a trafficking ring. These things are really making it dangerous. All our relationships, if I give money to my adult daughter, she's committed a felony by living off my proceeds. So these are some of the things and the different models and why I really don't like the Nevada model.
Well, I have a question about the health. Is there a requirement that workers, male or female, I guess, does their decriminalization cover just women, or is it male and female?
No, it would cover both, because we do have male workers, we have transgender workers, and female workers. Our youth study in New York showed 53% out of 289 people surveyed were male. In the United States and North America, Canada, all over North America, sex workers have less STDs than the general public. We believe forcing people into testing and registering is ineffective. I'm going to tell you why. Certain places like Seattle require strippers to register, and this resulted in a man filing a Freedom of Information request to get the information of these 30 strippers. I had to get an injunction. We do not need our names to be public record. We do not have discrimination legislation to protect us against discrimination in childcare, housing, or future employment. We don't have hate crime legislation in place. So we think it's crucial that people aren't forced to register. And I want to mention that in 2012, the Obama administration said people in prostitution would not be excluded from public services. So we hope to hold on to that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rachel West, and I just wanted to make a few extra points. I mean, we really want to emphasize, the whole issue of safety. It's really key to this bill, and the decriminalization is really on the agenda in the U.S. and internationally. There's growing support for it. And I was recently in the UK at a symposium in the UK Parliament where they were discussing how to improve safety for sex workers and how decriminalization actually does that. And this bill would really help sex workers because criminalization makes sex workers vulnerable to violence, and it increases rape and violence and forces prostitution underground. And violence against sex workers, as people know, is really rife, including serial murderers who operate with impunity because women are afraid to go to the police to report arrests, to report violence. Decriminalization would also enhance health, as sex workers could access services which they can't do now. And criminalization encourages all kinds of discriminatory policies. In California, there was a policy where sex workers could not receive compensation for rape. It was a statewide program that excluded sex workers from getting compensation for rape. We had to challenge that, and we organized a statewide campaign to get that regulation repealed. And we actually won and got a lot of support from people all around the state of California who were horrified that such discrimination exists. So it would really help end discrimination against sex workers. It would also end criminal records, which prevent sex workers from getting other jobs and keep sex workers in prostitution. And it would allow police time and resources to go into really going after violent crime, serious crimes such as rape, sexual assault, and trafficking, instead of into the endless decoy operations, stings, street sweeps, none of which are effective in reducing prostitution or have any effect on the violence against sex workers. The last point, it would also diminish the racial profiling which goes on all across the US. It's communities of colors who are targeted under prostitution and trafficking enforcement. And 42% of arrests, all prostitution arrests in the US are black people who are being arrested for prostitution, black women, whereas only 13.2% of the population in the US is black. So definitely racial profiling going on. And we think this bill is forward-looking. It's going to help change, if it passes, it'll help change the climate of violence and abuse under which sex workers suffer. So we think it's really important and really forward-looking, and we really hope legislators will support it today. Thanks.
Question. In addition to helping sex workers, won't it also help Johns, who in some cases are targeted by people for robbery, for instance, unscrupulous sex workers, for instance, with bouncers who basically will rob them in the black market?
Yeah, it'll help everybody, because also the clients of sex workers are also targeted in a discriminatory way too. We found that when the police go after clients of sex workers, they mainly go into low-income communities of color, immigrant communities, and those are the people who are getting arrested for prostitution. So like in San Francisco, 60% of men that are arrested for prostitution-related offenses are Latino men. So just like the war on drugs targeted black and immigrant communities, so the anti-trafficking enforcement and prostitution enforcement goes after, so that it'll help alleviate that racial profiling, which is so big, such a big point on the agenda in the U.S. today. With we've seen how the police target generally black and immigrant people, men and women, and yes, this is. I think if this bill passes, it'll have a result on that, stop the racial profiling in enforcement that goes on with black and immigrant men being arrested and going to prison.
Elizabeth, can I ask you a question?
Yes, certainly.
You go to the right, that's great. You're a Democrat. Have you talked to the governor about this bill?
I have not spoken to the governor yet. She's a very busy woman, and I think she has her eyes on her Senate campaign right now.
What about the leadership in your party?
Yes.
Are they supportive of this bill?
Yes. Representative Shurtleff is in fact meeting with us today to discuss these issues.
So you're hopeful to get his support?
I am hopeful to get his support. Representative Shurtleff thinks that all people, regardless of their choice of occupation, deserve to be represented.
And did Bella mention Rhode Island, did they repeal it? Would we be the only state that would decriminalize prostitution?
New Hampshire would be the first state to intentionally decriminalize prostitution. As Ms. Robinson mentioned, there have been Nevada does have a legalize and regulate structure, which unfortunately creates two tiers of sex workers. It pushes the most marginalized people into the black market. Rhode Island inadvertently decriminalized, and a judge only really recognized that fact in 2003.
Do you believe that if it's decriminalized, both these men and women would be able to preserve their Fifth Amendment, allowing them to help fight other crimes?
Yes, definitely. We know from New Zealand that decriminalization improves relations between sex workers and law enforcement, at which point they can work together to identify victims of trafficking, to identify underage sex workers and get them out of that environment.
What about other crimes such as drug trafficking or robberies?
Yeah, any sectors of the underground economy that don't have access to the courts and due process and all of that, it breeds corruption. It attracts the violence and theft and all sorts of things. So we want to bring sex workers into those institutions, into the healthcare system, into the justice system. Yes, certainly.
Hi, I'm Phoebe Jones, and representing the Global Women's Strike. Our national and international network is supporting this bill today. We've been campaigning for the recognition and payment for caring work. And we have a slogan, outlaw poverty, not prostitution, because this is a lot about poverty. When 1 in 25 families in the U.S. live on $2 a day, when single mothers are consistently the poorest, and when welfare reform was shredded what little there was of a safety net, it's not surprising that so many women faced with no alternative, resort to prostitution to survive, feed their kids, and put a roof over their heads. Young people who are homeless or can't get a job often end up in prostitution too. Criminalizing sex work is no help to anyone. On the contrary, it punishes huge numbers of people whose only crime is trying to survive. The decriminalization would tackle the increase in the numbers of women in prison, which has devastating consequences for children. The children of sex workers who are criminalized face being separated from their mothers and forcibly taken into foster care or adopted. Decriminalization would enable mothers and children to get support rather than punishment. Outlaw poverty, not prostitution.
Are there any other questions that any of us can take?
Representative Wyatt want to speak? Thank you.
I co-sponsored this bill because I don't believe that prostitution is the sort of thing that ought to be a crime. The same way I sponsored bills to make adultery not a crime. Sin, bad behavior, whatever you want to call it, no problem. It shouldn't be considered a crime.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
We'll open the hearing on House Bill 1614, FN, an act relative to the criminal penalty for prostitution. We have the prime sponsor, Representative Edwards. You may begin.
Thank you, Representative Welch and members of the committee. My name is Elizabeth Edwards and I represent Hillsborough District 11 in Manchester. I brought this bill forward in response to Amnesty International's August 2015 recommendation that governments across the world decriminalize sex work. Amnesty International studied all aspects of this issue for 2 years prior to their recommendation. They conducted detailed research and consulted with sex workers and trafficking allies and all sorts of decision makers from across the world. They are joining in their support of decriminalizing sex work the World Health Organization, the International Labor Organization, the Global Alliance Against Trafficking in Women, the Global Network of Sex Work Projects, the Global Commission on HIV and the Law, Human Rights Watch, the Open Society Foundations, and Anti-Slavery International. Right now, law enforcement and justice system resources are being consumed prosecuting interactions between consenting adults. Prohibition on prostitution pushes sex workers into the margins of society where they cannot report crimes against them. It pushes sex workers onto the street because they have to be constantly mobile so as not to get caught. Under decriminalization, like we see in New Zealand, and like Rhode Island had for several years, sex workers can organize for their rights. They gain access to the justice system. They are in a better position to insist on safety precautions like screening clients and wearing condoms. They can do their work indoors and install locks and cameras and hire security guards. Right now, sex workers are the #1 at-risk group for serial murderers. They are targeted because sociopaths know that people tend not to care what happens to them. That has to change. The best data that we have on what decriminalization would look like in New Hampshire comes from Rhode Island. A court decision in 2003 found that the Rhode Island legislature had inadvertently decriminalized indoor prostitution. In the 6 years that followed, incidents of rape dropped by 31%, and the transmission rate of sexually transmitted infections dropped by 39%. This is not merely among sex workers, but across the entire state's population. This is extremely strong evidence because it's the closest thing that we have to a randomized controlled trial, that decriminalization makes us all safer from violence and disease. We have a responsibility to make decisions based on the consequences of legislation, not on the intentions of the legislation. The consequences of the current legal regime are unjustifiable when we have a better option on the table that respects human rights and promotes public health and safety. I'm joined today by 3 tireless advocates for the rights of sex workers who will also be providing you with testimony, and I am happy to take any questions that you have.
Robinson has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we have any statistics on customers being arrested of prostitutes, which would seem to me they are committing a crime?
That is currently a crime right now. I don't have those statistics.
Do we have a notion that some get arrested?
Some, yeah. Most of the time. Sorry.
You have to ask.
Well, I'm trying to find out if this law is it made fairly? I mean, it just seems to me you read about prostitutes, but I don't read about customers going to jail, and I think I think your bill is absolutely good, but I'm just curious as to we are enforcing it fairly, and I can't believe we are.
Historically, the law has not been, it has been enforced much more against the providers of sex work rather than clients, yes. That's accurate.
Do you know how many people have been arrested and convicted in New Hampshire for prostitution, and how many people are currently serving time in prison for prostitution?
That's a great question, and I will get that for you. That is not, I have plenty of research here with me. I cannot anticipate every single question that I will get, and I'm happy to do any follow-up research that you want me to do, Representative Marston.
President Pantelakis?
Am I reading in what you're saying that indoor prostitution, does that mean we're going to have houses of ill repute that they used to be? They were just run, they were called whorehouses sometimes, but does that mean that it's legal to have it in your city or town in houses?
That would be the result of this legislation, yes.
Thank you.
Representative Marston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious to ask a question of you in regards to the agenda. And I'm looking at this from a woman's point of view, and they claim many a times that us male legislators never take that into consideration. But I think I have a good handle on how my wife would feel if I used the services of a sex, in this case you worded it prostitute in the bill. How my wife would feel and how many other women would feel when their husbands do that. It doesn't say this is only good for as long as you're doing it with an unmarried man. And I just have a problem with this bill from a woman's point of view. Do you recognize that?
Oh, certainly. I think that lying and infidelity is not a good idea, and you probably should not go see a prostitute. It would make your wife unhappy. I agree with that. That is, but people are infidelists outside of marriage right now. This is already happening. It's not like having a law, again, that requires us to arrest sex workers means that everybody is faithful in their marriage. We've had, prostitution has been illegal in most states in this country since the early 1900s. Has every person been faithful in his or her marriage? No. So this is not, that's not what we're addressing right now.
Follow up?
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you recognize that this is an enabling bill? This enables people to really commit crimes because we're going to eliminate penalties.
Crimes are being committed right now, and they're being committed against marginalized people. They're being committed against transgender people, disproportionately people of color, low-income people who have no other source of income and turn to prostitution as the last resort. Crimes are being committed against them, and those victims have no recourse in our justice system. So I think that it is a much better idea to spend law enforcement resources fighting crime that is violent, fighting theft, fraud, abuse, coercion, and I think that victims of crime that have long been ignored and pushed into the shadows, that this is a bill that is fighting for those people to finally have the same rights that the rest of us do.
Follow up. You didn't answer my question. Do you recognize that this is an enabling bill? You went on and explained all your theories, but you didn't answer my question. This is an enabling bill.
I'm sorry. How is removing a criminal penalty making more crime happen? If you're talking about definitions, then having one fewer crime on the books would actually mean less crime is happening. So I don't think I understand your question. I apologize.
To answer your question...
Further question?
I'm sorry, I apologize. Yes, to answer your question, the scenario that I see is for the woman not to do prostitution. Then she won't be in trouble. I've had plenty of say.
Come on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. There's an international sex slave industry. Do you feel that this bill will help expose that underbelly and allow people to be released from this?
Yeah, what they found in New Zealand is that decriminalization improved relationships between sex workers and the police. So when a sex worker notices that somebody might not be consenting to what she's doing when somebody's being exploited, or if there's somebody underage, now in New Zealand they can go to the police and help with that investigation. So this would actually help fight trafficking and those human rights violations. I just wanted to add that I have the paper, I have the summary of the study in Rhode Island that showed that rape decreased by 31%, and I read the whole entire paper. You all can download it for free if you input your legislative email address. So I've added that link at the bottom of this, and I'll be sharing that research with all of you. I can also make copies of the HIV Law Commission's recommendations regarding the rights of sex workers as well.
Senator Martin, followed by the secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. This seems to be a bill that shows by the philosophy that if you legalize the behavior, the problem goes away. But don't you think that legalizing the behavior, more people are going to participate in it, and with more, call them independent contractors, they're going to be more subject to the predatory behavior of organized crime than they are now?
That's one theory, which is why I think that evidence is important to back up theories. And what we found is that decriminalization makes people safer. You're right. There is an aspect to this where the market because the economic barriers to prostitution go down with decriminalization, there will be a somewhat larger market. That's what happened in Rhode Island. But I think that instead of trying to prevent people from making choices about what to do with their bodies and their money, we should care quite a lot that, like I said, rape in the whole entire population went down by 31%. There were 824 fewer reported rape cases in Rhode Island as a result of their decriminalization, and STIs went down by 39%. So I think that it's not a 100% magic pill. It's only about doing what will have the greatest net benefit for the most people. And I think that this bill is a net benefit to the population.
Quick follow-up. Thank you. and thank you for your answer, but just to make a generalized comparison, I don't want to cast aspersions on any group, but we're passed all these laws against domestic violence and enhancing restraining orders, and you still can't get women to report abuse. What makes you think because you legalize prostitution, they're going to be more willing to report abuse?
I think that that would be a better question for somebody who has actually worked as a sex worker and has the experience of being afraid to report crimes to the police. So if I would suggest that you ask that to somebody who has that personal knowledge. They'll be here. They'll be sitting here testifying.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Edwards. Are you concerned at all that if this becomes law, that there might be an influx into the state of New Hampshire from surrounding states or even other states in the country to the state of New Hampshire to participate in this practice, and what that might do to the way of life or the quality of life in New Hampshire? Have you given that any thought?
I did think about that. Right now, I live on the east side of Manchester. Right now, there are prostitutes on the street on my block. And I think about the danger that they are in every day because of our legal regime. And if somebody in another state faces violence and threats because of that state's prohibition on their occupation, and then moves here where they can install locks and security cameras and get access to due process and all of the other rights we enjoy. Honestly, I'm willing to take that net decrease in human suffering if it means we have more buildings with the shades drawn.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, well, what's your take on, I mean, there's only a certain amount of market, I would assume, that's out there. So the market is only going to allow so many workers to be in the state of New Hampshire, I'm guessing.
There are still, yeah, there's definitely a market equilibrium in prostitution, just like in all other sectors of the economy. It's not like all of a sudden every single person will decide to make money this way. It has its own inherent risks and reasons that people wouldn't want to do that kind of work. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I don't see anything in this bill that gives the towns and city the ability to say where these places can be.
Right, like zoning restrictions
Right.
and things like that.
No, not the zoning restrictions. We're saying that you can run a house of prostitution in this bill, and they be inside, they work inside, okay? And I just want to know what part of this legislation tells us where it can be.
Now, this is my personal perspective. I don't think that cities have rights. I think that the people in those cities have rights. So I understand concerns about like signage and advertising and things like that. And if the committee wanted to amend the bill to say that municipalities and towns can restrict the types of signage and advertisement, but otherwise I don't see what goes on behind closed doors as long as everybody behind those doors is aware and consenting adult. I don't really see how we have any business restricting that behavior.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A follow-up to Representative Penelakis, this question. You don't see a problem with a house of ill repute across the street from a high school, and how long do you think those boys in that school are gonna figure out what that house is all about?
I'm pretty sure that high schoolers know what a prostitute is already. It's, and this is, such a house would only permit adults to enter. There's no, that's in the bill actually. It keeps the current Class B felony that's already in the RSAs for any act involving another person who's under the age of 18. So this bill adequately protects
Follow up,
minors.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
In the reference that Representative Panalakis and myself are asking you is, we're not getting into that. We're saying that the towns can't regulate where these houses are. There's nothing in the bill, so it would not prevent them from putting that there, and you haven't addressed that question. You answered, and you keep going on about your theories, but you're not answering the question about zoning rights, and you came along and as well as much said, citizens have rights, but towns and cities don't have any rights. Excuse me?
Representative, we don't debate over this, we ask questions.
I wanted her to answer the question that both Panalakis and myself posed about the house being across from a high school.
Okay, so is this something that is likely to happen? No. Sex workers they want to operate, they don't want to be, inflaming the tempers of parents in the area. They're not likely to pick a building across the street from a school. And if you wanted to create an amendment saying no brothel may open within 100 yards of a school, I think that myself and the other interested parties would understand and be open to that kind of amendment, yes. So please go right ahead and add that in.
Representative Martin has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following along that line, and I don't care if the house is across the street from the high school or not, and be put across the street from the church if you want. But line 26, a person under 18 years of age shall not be subject to a juvenile delinquency proceeding under RSA criminal prosecution for intent under paragraph 1, which I'll go compare this to another bill. Doesn't it basically legalize a replacement and will move from the high school football team having a cake party after a victory to having a hooker party after a high school victory?
No, because if you see on line 20, this maintains the penalty in the RSA for any kind of prostitution involving somebody under the age of 18. What this says is that if somebody is a minor, they can't be charged with prostitution, that they're protected from police abuse if in that situation.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. I think there's a problem here with local control. I keep hearing, would you believe, all the time about local control. And having served on the planning board, zoning boards, and etc. This seems to be in conflict with what New Hampshire's supposed to be. I hear one side this way and the other side that way. Could you give an answer?
Yeah, I do understand that concern, but I have to say that the most robust version of local control that I advocate for is the right each individual in New Hampshire has to control his or her own body, to make decisions about what kind of work they do, how they earn money, how they pay the bills. That is the version of local control that I am most concerned with, and I completely understand the other perspective as well.
Follow-up, if I may. The thing is, don't you think the other citizens of that community also have a right?
Yes, they have a right to not go into the brothel, to not become a prostitute, to not patronize a prostitute. Those are their rights, but I don't think that they have the right to tell two consenting adults what they can and can't do.
One final, it would be, thank you, Mr. Chair. having served in the military for 20 years, and I know a lot about the areas of prostitution all over the world. This doesn't fit in as easily as what you're presenting at this present time with this piece of legislation.
Is there a question there?
Would you believe?
Would I believe that it's not the right time for this legislation? I think that it is always the right time to stand up for human rights, honestly. And the World Health Organization, for example, has advocated decriminalization of sex work for over a decade now. So the evidence is out that this is the best way to reduce trafficking, reduce violence, reduce the transmission of STIs. It's time that we listen to that evidence.
One final, that's it. Do you believe that that brings disease?
No, it reduces the transmission of disease, and I'll be sharing that report with you. I have copies for everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are there any statistics on Rhode Island, for instance, reflecting the fact that because an individual can sell his or her sexual talents, she or he would no longer work for an individual who almost keeps them as slaves? They could be in their own business. They might see 2 customers a night, not 14, because the boss says you see all of them or I beat the daylights out of you.
Yes.
Isn't there a big change there?
Yes, decriminalization is a path to end exploitation by pimps. It allows sex workers to make their own hours and decide what kind of clients they will and won't take. Absolutely, it's empowering.
Thank you. Representative Hirsch?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony in this bill. Just a quick question, actually a 2-part question. Part 1, you mentioned how Rhode Island sort of inadvertently did this, but yet the data that followed that oversight, or whatever you call it, seems pretty remarkable. I assume that Rhode Island has not made any attempt to undo what they did.
They did. They did undo it.
Oh, they did undo it?
Yes. In 2009, they recriminalized.
Oh, okay. Follow?
Yes.
Thank you. So, I guess, did any other states, locally or across the country, you mentioned New Zealand, have any other states seen this and studied this and have legislation in the works that might duplicate what Rhode Island tried to do and then abandoned?
Right. We anticipate, because Amnesty International is such a respected voice for human rights, we expect there to be an increasing number of bills like this introduced in other states. There is the case of Nevada where prostitution has been legal for a while. The problem there is that they have a legalize and regulate regime which creates 2 tiers of sex workers, the ones in the market who have to pay quite a lot of money to the brothel keepers and law enforcement on top of their taxes, and are required to live at the brothel for 2 weeks at a time. So there's definitely a violation of autonomy there. And then there's still in Nevada the black market sex workers who are still pushed out to the edges. People who are transgender, people who can't afford to pay the license. Anybody without a cervix, for example, cannot be a sex worker, a legal sex worker with the protections of the police in Nevada. So that's why sex workers' rights advocates and other people who have studied this issue advocate decriminalization instead of legalize and regulate. I personally hope to see lots of other decriminalization bills popping up across the country soon.
All right. I see no other questions. Thank you very much for your testimony. Representative Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. I had a couple of quick points. I wanted to testify against this version of the bill. I did go down to the Office of Legislative Services and draft an amendment, perhaps to be discussed later. I did want to correct on a previous question that was brought up. Under zoning, under enabling legislation under RSA 676, I think it is, towns and cities are already allowed to restrict almost anything in any zone. In fact, in Seabrook, we actually have a specific zoning law that's a general provision that applies to the entire town. And after someone brought in a kind of strip club, we came up with a rule that said we're not going to allow anything within 300 yards of a daycare, 200 yards of a church, so many hundreds of yards away from a residence, and the effect of that was that strip club did come in, and it's still in operation. But we don't have any others. So I think the local control is not my concern. What states have are 4 different options. You can have legal prostitution, you can have regulated prostitution, you can have decriminalized or effectively decriminalized prostitution, or you can have illegal prostitution. I mean, those, having been to 50 or 60 different countries around the world, I think that the worst of those 4 options has been illegal prostitution, because it puts the problem out in the street. It makes the sex workers, especially women who are most likely to be abused, puts them under the control of a pimp or some other type of dealer, some type of criminal. And women have to work about twice as much or 3 times as much, because they have to share what they take in with the pimp, or with the cost of legal fees defending themselves in court. And it's becoming increasingly viewed as a scam that states set up. There's a very cynical view of state governments in our society. We have to be realistic about it. We have to be fair in recognizing the problem. My biggest concern, and what I've seen, is spread of HIV and hepatitis. So illegal prostitution, I think most people recognize, contributes to illegal street prostitution, contributes to the spread of disease, black clap, chlamydia, hepatitis C, and HIV. The last 2 are HIV has resulted in the loss of about 1 million American lives, and the 2 biggest causes of the spread of HIV have been through unprotected sex and through sharing of needles. When we talk about harm reduction, like I talked about yesterday on the floor of the House, we usually tend to think about drug policy and how we're going to address drug policy. But harm reduction also deals with prostitution and other types of illegal activity. And what we're trying to do with harm reduction efforts, and what I'm trying to attempt to address with the affirmative defense and the amendment that I proposed, is trying to mandate testing as they do in Nevada. Now in Nevada, they take an unusual approach. We wouldn't be able to allow counties to come up with their own rules. Nevada has home rules for their counties. So they've been able to take, of their 16 counties, they've been able to allow either regulation or illegal prostitution. So half of their counties regulate it, usually the smaller rural counties, and half of the counties it's illegal. So the counties that Las Vegas and Reno are in have illegal prostitution, and 8 counties have regulated prostitution. And I believe there are 2 different types of regulated. When they have it regulated, they essentially consign it to brothels, mandate testing. There are, as the previous speaker mentioned, there are problems with regulation. But it's certainly not as bad as illegal prostitution. I think the important message that we have to send is what we're trying to target, of course, is illegal street prostitution, and we're trying to address the spread of HIV. We've lost 1 million Americans to the AIDS virus. We now have over 1 million Americans who are HIV positive right now. All of them are going to have a shortened life, and many of them are going to interact with other people and continue to spread these diseases. Right now, hepatitis C is killing more young people than AIDS, and we're going to have to address that. And I think this is a serious enough issue to kind of open up the books and open up the issues. I don't support this version of the bill, but I certainly understand what the prime sponsor is attempting to address.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you. Your call is Phoebe Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and the committee. My name is Phoebe Jones, and I'm here today representing the Global Women's Strike, which is a national and international network calling for the recognition and payment for all caring work. I'm actually a Quaker from Philadelphia, but I have a lot of family who live here in New Hampshire and Vermont. Our network is in support of HB 1614. We have a slogan on my button here that says, "Outlaw poverty, not prostitutes." Poverty has a lot to do with this issue. When 1 in 25 families in the U.S. lives on $2 a day, when 20% of families are on food stamps, when welfare reform and other measures have shredded what was left of the safety net, and when single mothers are consistently the poorest, it's not surprising that so many women, faced with no alternative, resort to prostitution to survive, feed their kids, and put a roof over their heads. Young people who are homeless or can't get a job often end up in prostitution too. Criminalizing sex work is no help to anyone. On the contrary, it punishes huge numbers of people whose only crime is trying to survive. Decriminalization would tackle the increase in the number of women in prison, which has devastating consequences for children. The children of sex workers who are criminalized face being separated from their mothers and forcibly taken, put in foster care, or adopted out. It happens all too often. Decriminalization would enable mothers and children to get support rather than punishment. So again, we say outlaw poverty, not prostitutes. Thank you.
Could I have a copy of your testimony, please, for the record?
I'll write it out for you.
Oh, okay, well, if you want to recopy it, you could send it to our secretary, Karen, in 204. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Helps us on the record.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. Do you think that if we make it legal for sex workers, that it will rub down on our younger people?
I don't think, I think it would help because we're talking about decriminalizing in this bill, meaning removing the penalties, which just removes the things that make it dangerous. I don't think it's going to mean that you'll have a whole influx of people or encouraging other people to do it. What it does do is that it enables women who are in that situation to not have everything worsened by it. And in Philadelphia, but I know it's true in New Hampshire and elsewhere, the number of children in foster care that are taken when mothers are in prison is absolutely astounding. And that actually, there's a foster care to prison pipeline. The outcomes for those children are not good. They do not do well and wind up often on the street. So it's the criminalization of it that's just exacerbating the problem. And if you remove that, then you can start to deal with the other issues, and that is really the best protection for children.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony. If you know, if somebody is charged with prostitution, what does that do for their future, getting a better job, just better in their lives if they say, you know what, this isn't for me, and I have an opportunity to better my life and get a job and treat my kids, in a better
Yeah.
environment.
Well, I think you answered it exactly right. It removes the stigma, and some of the other women who are who've had that experience can answer that better than I. But absolutely, it does. It takes away it gives you back a future, and well, they'll say more.
See no further questions? Representative Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. You've linked prostitution and poverty. And in the over 50 years we've had the war on poverty and the trillions of dollars that have been spent, we don't seem to have lifted anybody out of poverty, but you seem to imply that women are forced into prostitution because of poverty. So by inference, does that mean if they're legally allowed to practice prostitution, will be lifted out of poverty?
Well, you make a lot more money than you do working at, McDonald's, I hate to say it. I don't think actually that, I would disagree with you that we've had a war on poverty for 50 years, because I think we abandoned that war, and beginning with, mothers, taking away welfare reform. Taking away welfare, when welfare was passed, the numbers of women arrested for prostitution skyrocketed. So you took away some money that mothers had that was protecting the children, and they had no choice. So it's not just me saying that. The evidence showed that when you took away that money, the arrest for prostitution soared.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if you can answer this, but I'll throw it out anyway. There's been a lot of testimony about the reduction of diseases. Are you backing or suggesting that we assume we take on the same procedures that they do in the Orient, or that they do in Scandinavian countries, where sex workers are monitored weekly by their doctors and can prove that they're HIV free, and that's what will knock the disease down? Is that the suggestion?
I think the other women will testify that, in fact, sex workers have some of the highest rates. Their business depends on a clean bill of health, and but they can say more. Yeah.
Representative Robertson.
Thank you. One of the things that wouldn't this do is the prostitute could pick her customers, not be told by the pimp that she's going to do 6 this evening, when she could very well support herself if she kept 100% of the money on 2, and she could inspect them to see if they looked like they were not a danger to her, and if they looked that they were, she could say no.
Exactly. It would give a lot more control back to the woman. Yeah.
Thank you.
Further questions? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Chair calls Rachel West.
Hello, everybody. Really good to be here and support this bill. I'm from the U.S. Prostitutes Collective, and I also coordinate a project called the In Defense of Prostitute Women's Safety Project, which we help women who've been victims, sex workers who've been victims of rape and other violence. As has been said, this bill, like the Amnesty International policy, recent policy, is part of growing sentiment around this country in support of decriminalization. And as I recently spoke at a symposium in the UK Parliament on decriminalization, and the concern there among members of Parliament, really was on the issue of safety and how can they influence the issue of safety. So that was, a really key hearing that happened in the UK Parliament and also in the Scottish Parliament. They're considering decriminalization. As has been said, the key thing about it, and you are the Public Safety Committee, is that it would increase safety. This is the big concern. Criminalization makes sex workers vulnerable to violence in all kinds of ways, and it forces prostitution underground. And when it's underground, all kinds of things can happen to women, and there's no recourse to be able to go to the police, because most sex workers don't report to the police when they're victims of rape and other violence. And as has been said, serial murderers operate. There have been so many cases of serial murders. One of the most recent ones was in Los Angeles, where between 100 and 200 black women are missing or have been killed. Nobody knows about this case. I mean, we're talking about 200 women that have been murdered and killed. And that case was labeled by the police, no humans involved. That's what they called it, NHI, no humans involved, and it was dismissed. And not until recently, until a film was made about it, has anybody taken notice about it. Also on the whole question of health, which you've brought up, I mean, first of all, sex workers the incidence of AIDS is very low among sex workers, so they're not spreading disease, just to say that. But criminalization makes for all kinds of discrimination and discriminatory policies against sex workers. And one such example was in California, where I'm from. There was actually a regulation in the statewide California Victim Compensation Program that specifically denied sex workers the right to compensation for rape. Now, when we found out about it, and when other people found out about it, people were horrified that such a discriminatory regulation was allowed to exist. That you get raped, you go and apply for compensation, and they say, no, sorry, you don't get any compensation because you worked as a sex worker. Well, we initiated a campaign, a statewide campaign against that regulation, and we got a lot of public support. And the public didn't think that that was right. And we got the regulation repealed, and people felt like that was a step towards decriminalization. That if that kind of regulation can exist, then other kinds of discrimination exist. And it was a victory to get that passed. As has been said, prostitution really is about women's poverty, and many prostitutes would get out if there were resources to be able to get out. And there is a DC city council member who's recently said that he wants to decriminalize so that resources can be provided for safety and for women who do want to get out of prostitution, because as Phoebe has said, many sex workers, many of the women in our network are mothers. They're struggling to survive. They don't particularly want to be in prostitution. Some women do, but many don't. And given the chance, given the resources, women would get out of prostitution. The other thing that has been mentioned and is really crucial is the whole question of police resources, which would go into investigating serious crimes such as rape, sexual assault, trafficking, instead of into the endless decoy operations, the street sweeps, the stings, the crackdowns that go on in every city in this country, and including arresting clients. A lot of clients of sex workers are arrested. That hasn't reduced the number of sex workers, it hasn't reduced the amount of prostitution that goes on, and it hasn't done anything to address the situation of violence. And often law enforcement is misdirected by false claims of trafficking, which end up targeting immigrant women, who are the ones who get arrested and deported, while genuine victims of trafficking don't really get help. And in the federal trafficking bill, that's the federal funding for trafficking, anti-trafficking, most of the money, when it was reauthorized recently, went into programs that go after the clients of sex workers, and very little money went into helping victims of trafficking. So that really needs to be reversed. And if there was decriminalization, more money would go into actually helping the victims of trafficking and not into trying to find the customers and the sex workers online. Hundreds of hours of police time goes into trying to find who's working and where they're working. In the UK, zones have been set up. Now, we don't think zoning is the right way to go about it, but it is a step towards decriminalization. And police have said to us over and over again that arresting women does no good. I mean, police and ex-police, recognize that. And the no arrest zones in the UK have been set up to make sex work safer. I mean, women are allowed to work in particular zones. And the police say that they wanted to do something different, that they realize what they're doing doesn't work, and they wanted to be brave and take some risks. The other thing that decriminalization would do would be diminish the racial profiling that goes on. And throughout the U.S., the prostitution enforcement is definitely disproportionately they target people of color under the prostitution laws, and also in the anti-trafficking enforcement, just like the war on drugs. When there's enforcement going on, mostly it happens in communities of color, low-income communities, and that's who gets picked up for prostitution. Like nationally, 42% of people arrested for prostitution are black, but black people only make 13.2% of the population. And in New York, 70%, almost all women who are facing prostitution in the trafficking courts, which are prostitution courts, were black women. So, overwhelmingly the enforcement, is racially disproportionately targeted towards black people. And if you stop the enforcement, that will make a big difference. Arresting clients, which is being proposed in a bill coming up later, HB 1613, wouldn't make it safer for sex workers, as I've said, or help sex workers to leave prostitution. Just like the prohibition of alcohol led to gangsterism, the increased prohibition of prostitution would drive it further underground and make it more stigmatizing, exploitative, and dangerous to work. I think some of you are recognizing that. On the other hand, HB 1614, and I'm ending, the bill in front of you, is forward-looking. It could help change the climate of violence and abuse under which sex workers suffer. And as has been said, when New Zealand was decriminalized in 2003, there was no increase in prostitution. Sex workers and police, the relationship was much better. And we heard recently at the symposium in the UK in London from a woman from New Zealand. She said women go, they report rape to the police follow up, attacks are quickly sorted out, and it's just a tremendous difference when women feel comfortable, they can report to the police. Attackers are caught much quickly. Right now, serial murderers go on, nobody does anything, and then they go on to attack non-prostitute women. That's also a trend. They start with prostitutes and they go on to attack other women. So, if it was above board and sex workers could report, it would mean a lot more safety for women, and they wouldn't fear arrest when they go and report violence. We urge you to be bold today. We know it's a big step, and to take the lead from Amnesty International's, excellent report that was very carefully considered, which calls on states to ensure that sex workers enjoy full and equal legal protection from abuse and violence. Please vote yes on decriminalizing today. Thank you. I do have a longer statement because, that I shortened it just for the presentation, which I will hand out. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Thank you.
Representative Hirsch has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. West, for appearing before us today with your information. I'm wondering if your collective has any or more New Hampshire-specific data or New Hampshire-specific information that would perhaps help us understand the need for such a bill in New Hampshire. I understand the global concern and the national concern, international concern, but I'm wondering, I seem to have a void here about New Hampshire specific information. I don't know if you have anything like that.
Not yet. Because we just found out about the bill so recently. We're just collecting the information now, but we'll definitely be talking to people here and looking into it more. We can send you information that we have, but we literally found out about the bill a couple of weeks ago. And we wanted to come and give our view.
Sure. That's very useful.
Other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony today. Any prosecutorial statistics on the success of prosecuting rape cases with this scenario? I could see that might be problematic because I'm sure consensual sex as a defense would be raised under the conditions, under the circumstances. Do you have any stats that would indicate in the countries that have legalized it, that prosecution has been successful for rape cases.
Yes, in fact, the woman that testified from the New Zealand Prostitutes Collective, who was the group that brought in decriminalization in 2003, gave a number of cases where the police actually came and testified in support of the women, as opposed to being usually the opposite in a case. And the cases were resolved. And I don't have statistics about it. We can get them from New Zealand because they've done reviews. Like the government has done reviews of the law and has all kinds of statistics. And definitely there's cases where the rape cases have been prosecuted and the rapists have gone to jail.
See no further questions. Thank you very much for your testimony. Chair calls Amanda Grady.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Amanda Grady Sexton. I am the representative of the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. We are the umbrella organization for the 13 crisis centers throughout the state that serve victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, stalking, and human trafficking. I hadn't anticipated speaking today, but a couple of issues that have come up that I'd like to address and just be as a resource to you if you have any questions. First, I just wanted to thank the sponsor and Ms. Jones and Ms. West. I think that they all brought forward some very important policy and academic discussions about this issue, and there's certainly no question that we have a serious problem in this state with the issue of sexual assault as well as the issue of human trafficking. I think that you've heard today that there is certainly an intersection between human trafficking and prostitution. I'll just give you a quick example. The human trafficking hotline is directed to our crisis centers, and I'm CC'd on many of those calls. And a few months ago, there was a call from a woman who had put an ad on Craigslist looking to offer to sell services, sexual services. There were some people who responded to that ad drove up from New York and picked up her and her friend and brought them to an event, a high-profile event here in New Hampshire. And on their way from Vermont to this event, they were held at gunpoint. They had their license stolen. They were threatened and were brought to this event and sold under the thumb of these criminals. So again, it started as something that was consensual and ended in something that was very horrific. One of the women did escape from the situation. It was not reported to the police out of fear. But these are very real situations that are happening in all of our communities. It's not just happening in Manchester or Concord or Nashua. It's happening in small communities and in rural areas like Vermont as well. And these cases, these human trafficking cases, have only been exacerbated by the heroin crisis that we're facing here in the state. There is a hearing before this committee on Tuesday to address the issue of human trafficking, to try to address some of the criminal penalties. And I think that you'll hear a lot more about that then. But these are very, very complicated issues, the issues of prostitution, the issues of human trafficking, as you've heard. And I think that if I was a betting woman, I would say that the state of New Hampshire is probably not in a position that this year we're going to be legalizing or decriminalizing prostitution. But that said, I do think that these are issues that certainly merit more conversation. And I think it might be beneficial for this committee and other interested parties to hear from victims, from more advocates, from those that are sex workers, those that are advocates for human trafficking victims, prosecutors and police, to take a look at these issues and talk about how they're increasing in the state, talk about what we can do, and also hear from folks about what we are currently doing in the state to try to combat these issues. So if the committee would be interested, I'd be very happy to work with anyone to pull together an informational session or to look at a study committee or whatever it may be. But I did want to just be here today to talk about the problems that we're seeing, and I think they're very real.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Amanda, for your testimony. I'm wondering, to help me see how this bill would affect the situation. Could you think about that story you just told and retell it if this law were in fact on the books? How might that story have gone?
It's hard to know. It's really hard to know because we don't really have great examples. New Hampshire is not like any of the Scandinavian countries. So I've thought sort of one of the reasons why I wasn't prepared to testify is because I've been sort of mulling that around and talking to experts and talking to members from the Portsmouth Police Department and the ICAC folks and prosecutors and advocates and really trying to get a handle on exactly what you just asked, Representative. What would this mean? And we don't have the answers, but I think that we certainly are in a position where we need to come up with some answers and to address these issues, and I know that this legislature has shown overwhelming support for victims of human trafficking and sexual assault, and I think that they should be explored, but I don't think that I'm able to, or any of us are able to take, what the results of Rhode Island or any country and apply them here in New Hampshire. I wish I could.
Yeah,
that's a tough one.
Really quick, Representative Hanalak has a question.
Thank you for taking my question. Are you for or against this bill?
We're not taking a position, but again, we do think that it's important to look further into these issues, and we're not doing everything we can in the state of New Hampshire to address the issues of sexual violence and human trafficking, and I think we can do more from a policy perspective. And we have no funding for crisis centers to be addressing these issues or for any of the frontline workers, no federal dollars or state dollars coming to the state. It's all private dollars. So there's a lot that we can do, but I don't have the answers. But I know the people who, I know the right people who should be at the table to have the discussions, and I'd be very happy to coordinate something, as I said.
Thank you.
No further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Tony Rossano, you put down 10 minutes, huh? I need to caution you because some of the members are going to leave to eat lunch.
I understand.
You gotta keep it.
I'll keep it brief. I don't have any statistics with me. I was actually visiting the great state of New Hampshire on vacation, and I found about this hearing, and I thought that I might have some insight, just as a person, as a community member, someone who wants to be an actual citizen of New Hampshire. I really like it here. My name is Tony Rossano. I don't know if it matters, but I am a Republican. But I'm actually in support of this bill. I actually have extensive experience working with sex workers, not for their services, but as a technological advisor. I was brought into a community where I was asked to speak to sex workers on how to better handle their finances, to protect themselves from theft, extortion, those types of things. It has then since grown to other things of reaching out using communicative methods. We've got all kinds of new technological advancements these days where you can communicate instantly to a social worker, police officer, shelters, that kind of thing. We're trying to link those things together. Most of the sex workers I've been working with have been in Toronto, where it is actually legal up there in Canada, as well as some in Nevada, and some illegal prostitutes and other sex workers in the state of New York. And I want to emphasize that sex work is not just prostitution. There's other areas of sex work which become gray areas, and that's where a lot of the issues sometimes arise as well. One of the things that I've been working with some of the sex workers in other jurisdictions is actually building databases of these contacts, of how to reach help in case there's an emergency. And I'm seeing the kinds of concerns. They are greatly different depending on the types of legalization or decriminalization, depending on the area, so I have a little insight. For instance, in Toronto, one of the primary concerns is actually more or less theft and abuse by clients. Whereas in jurisdictions such as New York, one of the #1 concerns is violence from cops. I want to reemphasize cops. Because once they speak to a cop, or if they're caught doing sex work, they are extorted for money or sexual services or other. And I'm talking drugs, other things that have nothing to do with prostitution or sex work. What we take for granted is the Fifth Amendment, the ability to recuse oneself from self-incrimination. Sex workers don't have that luxury, don't have that right. They can't come forward. They can't speak about other issues. They see somebody's doing a drug deal, they can't speak about it. or there's a murder or rape or some type of violence. And you can see those types of things change in the areas where you do have legalization or decriminalization. They actually can come forward. And I guess that's pretty much all. I know we're on a brief schedule, so I'm free to take questions.
Just have one.
Sure.
In working with these people, and it's against the law, how can they expect, if they're breaking the law, to be able to go to the police officer and get a charge dropped or something because they tell them about that drug dealer?
They can't. In most cases in the areas such as New York, I do have experience working with mostly women, but it's not exclusive to women. They can't go to cops. Their primary contacts in some of these databases are actually girlfriends or other sex workers, and the ability to actually seek help is very difficult. In Toronto, primary contact is their local beat cop, because they have a relationship, they can talk to, and they feel comfortable approaching law enforcement, saying that there's a problem, there's a criminal element in this area. In British Columbia, they actually put out a television PSA for educating the public of how the relationship has changed. Rather than the police union being against it, they're actually for it now because they have extra eyes and ears on the streets, because you know what's happening. And another thing I want to point out is in British Columbia, they do have zoning restrictions, can't do it near churches and schools and stuff like that. And I'm kind of impartial on all that stuff, I don't care about that stuff. But that's the thing that they talk about, is they work with the girls or guys or whatever. It's not in their best interest to work in those areas. And so they have a relationship and establish that. And they also educate on how the police are actually collecting additional information on this drug problem. This heroin problem is horrible in the state, and we can do something about that. And having extra eyes and ears, I think, is a really good way to just snuff this out.
Thank you. Hirsch has a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. So I understand from what I've heard from you and a few others that if this were decriminalized, sex workers might be more likely to come forward and testify on not only their own victimization, but also crimes done by others. But I'm wondering, would prosecution still have a field day discrediting their testimony based on their line of work, even though it's legal? I wonder what this might do for that, if anything.
Well, discrediting is a completely different argument, and that's up for the courts to decide or juries to decide whether or not evidence is credible or not. But if you don't have people coming forward, you have no case to begin with. You can't go after these drug lords. You can't go after these, I hate to say it, dirtbags that are really causing problems. People need to be able to come forward. And the first step is this. Whether it's, and the thing is that if better prepared, I could probably produce some officers from Canada, some mounted police, probably would be willing to testify how it's actually helped their cases. Having these resources actually helps police officers do what they do.
Thank you.
No further questions. Thank you very much for your testimony. Chair calls Chris Dornan. We're down 2 minutes.
Or less. Mr. Chairman, I'm Chris Dornan, the chairman of Citizens for Criminal Justice Reform. I originally was going to oppose the bill, but from what I've heard, I'm not going to submit my written testimony at all. I think you need to have a study commission that looks into this problem. We've heard enough comments about it. There's some authorities out there in the world. I think I would agree with Amanda Grady-Sexton that we ought to study the problem.
That's your testimony? Thank you very much.
I do something.
Ian Freeman.
Good morning, or I guess good afternoon. At this point, I'm Ian Freeman. I'm one of the co-chairs of the New Hampshire Liberty Party. I fully support this legislation, and it's already been covered how this particular legislation would help protect prostitutes from violence, the violence from the pimps, the violence from violent customers who might want to beat them, perhaps rape them. But it also protects the Johns, and I think that's another important aspect of this. We know that prohibition doesn't work. It doesn't work with alcohol, and it doesn't work with prostitution. When you prohibit a product or service, it still exists. The marketplace still exists for that. There's still a demand for sex services, but it just goes underground. And when you force something into the underground, you get into the area of criminal activity. And when something's in the underground, it's more dangerous as a result of that. We've seen that drugs, for instance, are more dangerous. They're more impure, for instance, because they're illegal. Similarly, prostitution is more dangerous. There's almost no chance of any kind of testing going on. But further, Johns can face beatings. It's not uncommon for a John to go into a hotel room with a street-walking prostitute, and then there's a big bulky man waiting in the hotel room for them who then robs them or perhaps beats them, and the John ends up minus a wallet, and if they're lucky, they don't take a beating, they just get robbed. So these things do happen in the black marketplace, and having a decriminalized market for prostitution would also protect the customers of some of the prostitutes as well. Representative Marston, who has left the room at this point, suggested that that prostitution is a crime, but I'd like to point out that it is a crime without a victim. And so therefore, in my mind, this is not a crime at all. There's no victim, there is no crime, and we need to take this crime off the books. So I fully support this. And further, I think there's another point that should be made. Prostitutes, most people, when they think about a prostitute, think of the streetwalker, the sort of the lowest level prostitute, a woman who might be, for instance, doing the business so she can get money for drugs and is being ruled by a pimp. If you take prostitution and you make it something that's no longer a criminal act, what you'll see happen is the streetwalker problem will generally go away, because then people can go inside homes. You can have in-call girls and out-call girls who would then go to the clients or have the clients come to them. So you take that ugly streetwalker problem basically away when you decriminalize prostitution as well. And regarding testing, I would say let the market decide on testing, not the government. So those are my thoughts, and thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Just briefly.
Representative Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony. If you know, I'm trying to think of the right word. How much are the taxpayers paying to try to make this illegal and do away with it? With like the police, courts, and et cetera.
Having spent time in courts, I regularly am there for various different outreach purposes and observation purposes. I have seen a case within the last year or so of prostitution in Keene. And I suspect there's more enforcement in Manchester and bigger cities, but in Keene, there's at least one officer who is apparently, there's not much of a streetwalker issue in Keene, but what he's doing is he'll respond to advertisements on Craigslist, or he'll place advertisements on Craigslist. And there was one guy who, the police officer was masquerading as though he were a 21-year-old Keene State College student who was willing to engage in sexual services. He met, the girl was supposed to meet this client in a McDonald's parking lot, and of course it was a police officer who he ended up meeting, and this guy ended up being charged. So yeah, they do have police who are spending precious police hours going after guys who are, they're just doing what they want to do. The criminalization of prostitution hasn't ended prostitution. This is the oldest profession in the world for a reason, because it's not going anywhere. So decriminalizing this allows police to spend their resources on real crimes with real victims.
As you know, further questions, thank you very much. Okay, call the fellow Robbins.
What's that? Relative on?
It could be.
Let's see if you'll agree to that after you hear what I have to say. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for having me, and I appreciate the committee's attention. My name is Bella Robinson. I'm the Executive Director of the Rhode Island chapter of Coyote. I've been a sex worker for over 33 years, and I do want to explain that every sex worker has a different experience. Today I'm in a good situation. I started out when I was a young girl at night. I was 18, working on the street-based level, because before the internet, almost all sex workers worked either the streets or through the yellow pages. And since the internet and being able to choose my own clients, I've been able to empower myself and I now use the privilege I have making my living as a sex worker to do outreach to my community. To give you a little background, I regularly present at UNH, Rutgers, Brown University, Southern Connecticut for Women's Gender Studies and Criminal Justice students. I have already started to survey New England sex workers. I've interviewed 43 workers through a research project with Brown. One of the top things we find out is the women cannot report abuse to the police. Now, I want to go for a little bit because I worked in Rhode Island both under decriminalization and since criminalization since 2009. And there's been a lot of, I know some people know a little bit about this, but there's been a lot of little tweaks that weren't correct. Rhode Island decriminalized prostitution because Margot St. James with Coyote filed a suit in federal court. Her complaint was, what right does the state have to do in the sex lives of adults in private? And two, you're only arresting the women. So prior to the Coyote case, all prostitution in Rhode Island was a felony. So the case was dismissed as muted, but the state did pay her the attorney fees because the court ruled it changed the legislation, and they chose to make public a misdemeanor and left indoor. And I get the hysteria with people, oh, there's going to be brothels and all this, but let me assure you, there's residential brothels all over New Hampshire, and you don't even know they're there. Do it suggest that it's okay that I live near a school or a church or your house and I have free sex and it's okay, and that what I'm doing is any different is pretty insulting. And furthermore, I want to point out as far as we heard a lot about the HIV and the Hep C, and even all the HIV organizations know that forcing people into testing is not going to work. The best thing you can do is provide services. People will come. Out of all North America, sex workers have less STDs than the general public. But let's talk about a street-based worker. I'm not saying they're all on drugs, but they're usually not in a good position to negotiate for their safety, their well-being. A lot of them have drug issues. So the more empowered a sex worker is, the better she's able to protect herself. Now, once the trafficking rhetoric started and the hysteria started around trafficking, there were all these laws made, so if I work with another woman and we share space, or I hire someone to answer my phone or screen my calls, a driver, a bodyguard, anyone, they're all classified as pimps and traffickers. These are third-party support staff. These people, we don't work for them, they work for us. There's a huge difference between legalization and decriminalization. When we look at the legalized system in the brothels in Nevada, those women have to live there. They have to turn over half their income. They're forced into testing. They have to get all these permits that they cost them money and it goes to the police. They don't have a lot. Under Rhode Island laws, under decrim, the women could work from home, hotels, spas, escort agencies online. I've interviewed a few spa workers, and I've asked lots and lots of clients that used to go to the Providence spas. And they tell me the situation was you paid a door fee, $50 when you went in. You negotiated with the worker. She kept all her money. She picked her shifts. She did not have to live there. The brothel or the spa made their money by charging each client $50, $60 to walk in the door. I thought that seemed like a very fair way to go. One of the reasons erotic dancers and strippers will usually drive to the next town to dance is they don't want people in their town to know that they're dancing. So a lot of sex workers rather work for an agency or a spa because they work maybe the weekend while the ex-husband has the kids for the weekend. And they're able to, drive an hour away, work for a spa, come home, and totally separate that life. I do want to talk about a couple things about our safe harbor laws. I do understand that trafficking is a valid concern. People are trafficked sometimes. But when you can't call the police to report violence, or you end up living with, you end up living with the man and he becomes abusive, you can't call the police because he's going to tell. He's going to tell you're a sex worker. He's going to tell your landlord. You might be evicted. You might be arrested while he's left in the house with your children. So we've actually forced these women to stay in these abusive situations. A lot of my research is showing that a lot of shelters in several states refuse to take sex workers or trafficking victims in. And I want to talk about safe harbor laws. These laws were created to protect minors in the sex trade. First of all, I'll bring up the The Urban Institute New York did a study of 289 youths. They all entered into what we call survival sex as minors because they couldn't get the state of New York to provide them shelter or any other vital services. 96% of these kids said they don't have pimps, they weren't exploited, they taught each other how to do this, how to find clients, how to avoid the police, how to avoid the social workers. Rhode Island sentenced an 18-year-old boy last year to 15 years in prison. He was 17 when the crime occurred. His only crime was his girlfriend was an underage prostitute. That boy's labeled as a sex offender. He's going to prison for 15 years. Our safe harbor laws have failed. So I'll be passing this out. It's a detailed report that cited scientific research. Another thing I want to talk about real quick is the NGO. There's a lot of NGOs that do good things. This report shows that we're paying over $600 million a year to NGOs who do nothing but create awareness about trafficking. And I can tell you, the Indians in the rainforest already know. They don't provide any services to our youth. So while these 300 youths in New York and everywhere else, we right now have 2.5 million homeless youths in this country. All the money's going to the NGOs, none of the services are being provided for these children. So I want to talk about New Zealand for a moment. As we talked about, what they did in New Zealand is they kind of got a committee with the sex workers, the police, the health officials, and they sat down and they said, our main priority is the health and safety of the sex workers. We don't care about anyone else, any other hysteria. It's going to be the first thing. And they hammered out that bill. And since then, some amazing things have happened. A Bravo worker was able to sue a Bravo manager and win $50,000 for sexual harassment. A street-based worker, client wouldn't pay her, and the police show up and say, son, you're going to go to the ATM and take that $100 out and give it to her, or you're going to jail for theft. Another guy gave a girl on escort a fake envelope, an empty envelope that was supposed to have $800 in it. And when he went to court, he was all smug, thinking the judge was going to tell him to pay it back. The judge says, you received sex by fraud, that's rape, you're paying it back, and you're doing 8 months in jail. Now, you had Mr. Hurst, the Representative Hurst, had a great problem about whether we were relieved once we report the crime and we're in court, we're testifying, because, quite frankly, it's pretty easy to make us look bad. And again, that has a lot to do with the jury. But when people can't report these crimes, these predators go on to do it to someone else. I want to remind everyone about the Gilgo Beach murders up on Long Island a few years ago, where over a dozen women were dumped and buried. People have to be able to report crimes. As far as trying to criminalize the clients, I'm going to tell you why that's another failed attempt. As first of all, sometimes clients are first responders in bad situations. If they get to a hotel or an apartment, the girl's crying and she just got in a fight with her boyfriend and he took her phone or her wallet, he might give her a ride to safety. They're first responders. So we've seen these trafficking NGOs do with local task force as they're on scene when the person's arrested. They're telling the public that these people are being rescued and they're being offered services. They're not being offered housing. They're not being offered jobs at the living wage. They're not being offered a higher education without debt. They're going on the 2-on-1 wheel like homeless people do, trying to find shelters. I imagine if you're been beaten up or you're homeless, those things are helpful. But when you take someone in my situations who has empowered herself by sex work and you want to rescue me and want me to leave my nice apartment and go live in a public shelter, there's a lot about that. But I do want to answer questions because a lot of the questions you asked other people, I have the answers to. So please feel free.
One question of, if you know, if you've experienced it or, some of your friends, having a record for prostitution and then you want to better yourself to a better job and the employer looks and goes, no, I don't think so.
That's a fabulous question. I got my first prostitution conviction 2 weeks after my 18th birthday. They told me if I pled guilty, they would withhold the adjudication. I did the probation, they withheld the adjudication, and I can go online and find that prostitution conviction. It says prostitution, adjudication withheld. We don't have discrimination legislation. We can be discriminated in housing, child custody, and future employment. So this is a starting ground for decriminalization. We still need hate crime legislation. We still need discrimination legislation. We have a long way to go, but this is where we need to start. And it was a really great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Cushing.
Thank you. My apologies, I was out of the room for a couple of other bills that I'm attending to, and you may have covered this, or somebody else may have covered it. Yeah, a couple of years ago, the state of New Hampshire passed a human trafficking law, and during the course of that, you know, I'm cognizant of the fact that, you know, here in New Hampshire, there is prostitution, a very notorious instance. It was actually not in New Hampshire, but across the river from Portsmouth at the so-called Danish Health Club. And during the course of working on that, I became acquainted with somebody who was, you know, who worked at the Danish Health Club. And what I had a conversation with her about, is about, you know, the life, so to speak, and how someone gets in the life, and whether or not per se, someone who is engaged in sex work is, you know, is being exploited one way or the other. I mean, I recognize you know, having your own agency, but is that a problem?
It could be. And it could depend on someone's level of empowerment. And I was talking a little earlier about if you have a street-based worker, a lot of them have drug issues, some of them are homeless. They're not going to be able to negotiate for safe sex and using condoms, their rate of pay, that they might have a client that wants to drive into an industrial area because he's scared, you know, a cop's going to see them. So she has very little power to negotiate her situation. Someone that has more power to negotiate their situation, that's not criminalized, that can start to change the rules and how they organize their business, can take workshops. We teach the women how to screen clients, how to answer phones. They can be a lot more empowered. So criminalization really created a situation where women can't tell, they can't tell on who's abusing them. People can use them. They're also used as CIs and law enforcement snitches a lot of times, and put in dangerous situations that way. So it can still happen, and I'm not going to say even criminalization doesn't stop trafficking. Nothing stops everything, you know, but it does minimize it. And when people can come forward to at least get out of it, if I can look at you when you're threatening me and say, I'm going to tell, that's a lot of power. When I can't say I'm going to tell, it gives people a lot of power over you.
Do you have a follow-up? Yeah, I know in discussions, and I can't recall where I was reading that the policy vis-a-vis prostitution that was adopted was a decriminalization of prostitution for women, for the person whose body is being used or rented, but a continuation of penalties for, again, for the Johns or for the person, you know, with an understanding that you know, human sexual interaction should not be commercialized. And I'm just, I'm asking if you think that, can you envision a policy where it would be legal for someone to sell their body, but illegal for someone to buy?
Well, that's called the Nordic model.
What is it called?
First of all, I want to talk about, you know, we have a lot of vets.
No, I didn't hear what the term is.
The Nordic model, the Swedish model, it's where they criminalize the client.
Maybe that's what I'm.
But I'm going to explain. First of all, I believe men do have a right. There's disabled men, there's single men, there's married men, there's elderly men. They have a right. It's you know, a constitutional right to have a sexual privacy with Lawrence versus Texas. We've kind of covered that with gay marriage and gay rights. So going on to, okay, I'm losing my train of thought, the Nordic model. What they're doing in other countries with the Nordic model is they said, okay, we're not going to criminalize the women anymore. How it's being implemented in the United States is we're just going to do stings and round up all the clients, but we're still criminalized. But another bad thing that happened is they start stalking the sex workers in call locations and apartments. So they can't really prove the guy went in there and paid him for sex. So when he comes out, they threaten him. If you don't tell us, we're going to call your wife. But if you admit it, we'll give you a summons to appear, and you'll have time to explain it to your wife. And obviously, these guys will go to review boards and say, you know, if you go to so-and-so's house, the cops are going to shake you down, and she now can't make any money or has to move, and she can't pay her rent. So when you're, you know, it's one thing if you're going to replace these women's income, but when you're saying, just stop doing it and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, there's not one city in this country you can rent a one-bedroom apartment on minimum wage. People can't live on $8 or $10 an hour, especially when they're raising kids. This, to some people, is the best option. Someone as myself, I could have done other things over the years, but this is still the best option for me. I only have to work 4 or 5 hours a week. I'm able to volunteer 40 to 50 hours of my time every week. I work with a domestic violence shelter. I work with youth groups. I go out and talk to college, students. I do this all the time on my dime for free because I'm in a situation that has empowered me and enabled me to do that. And I'm not saying that happens to all women. Every sex worker's situation and experience is different. So, I hope that answered your question.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else?
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to hand out a couple of these things.
Is there anyone here who wishes to testify on House Bill 1614?
Did anybody from the department testify?
I thought you got a card?
Yes.
No.
I don't have a card, but we did get it.
We have testimony.
We have testimony.
This is an 18-page.
So hearing is closed.
We'd like to invite you to visit freekeen.com. Freekeen.com features audio, video, and blogs chronicling the transition to a voluntary society. Freekeen.com also has comments and discussion forums so you can be heard. Freekeen.com.
I should be in Keene, New Hampshire with the Free Staters.